Welcome to Teal Talk, a podcast brought to you by the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. That's OAESV for short. We're your hosts, Taylor
and Lori.
In each episode, we speak with professionals in the field to dive deep into the intersectional issues that affect survivors in Ohio.
Before we begin, we want to give a content warning that we will be discussing sexual violence and other issues that may be upsetting and triggering. If you need help, please feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. Please take care of yourself. Hello, and welcome back to Teal Talk. I'm your host, Lori Hurley, the Resource and Engagement Manager at OAESV. Today, I had the chance to sit down with Elyse McConnell, Executive Director of the Ohio Victim Witness Association, OVWA, and we got into everything from the history of the field to what's ahead with the Ohio Advocate Network, or OAN. If you've been hearing those acronyms and wondering what they actually mean for your day-to-day work, well, you're in the right place. Today, we're talking about something that sits at the core of strong survivor-centered work. How do we support advocates? How do we build standards? And how do we stay connected as a field? So a little bit about OVWA. It is a statewide coalition of victim advocates and allied professionals that is dedicated to advancing excellence across the field of crime victim and victim services. Their mission is to be an Ohio leader for crime victims, advocates, and allied professionals by promoting best practices that result in meaningful rights and quality services. All right, let's get into it. Hi, Elyse. Welcome to the podcast. First, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation, especially because there's so much movement happening right now around OAN. So I shared a high-level explanation about what the Ohio Victim Witness Association is at the top of the episode. But can you explain OVWA in your own words at the most basic level?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really honored to be here and to have the chance to speak with you and everyone listening. I would say at the heart of it, our mission is really simple. When we strengthen advocates, we strengthen services for survivors and for victims. You know, OAESV and OVWA have quite a bit in common. However, OAESV is primarily focused on prevention and response to sexual violence. OVWA is a bit more general in our focus. Most of the folks that we're serving are more generalist practitioners, so they're serving anybody who kind of walks in the door. However, we welcome anyone to be members who would like to expand their practice. I think what we have strongly in common between our agencies is that we want to ensure that survivors and victims receive very compassionate, trauma-informed, and high-quality support, no matter where they're seeking support from.
Oh, I love what you said. When we strengthen advocates, we strengthen services. That feels like such a clear through line between our two organizations and honestly really resonates deeply with our work at OAESV. So many of our podcast listeners are working specifically in sexual violence, but we're all part of this broader ecosystem of victim services. So your explanation helped me understand like how OVWA and OAESV fit into this like bigger picture. Would you say that OVWA is a training and technical assistance provider, or is that too niche?
No, that's our biggest focus area, to be honest. We really work to identify some of the pressing issues and also needs that are happening in the field of victim advocacy. We work to bring in experts to train on those subjects throughout the year. We also have an online learning system where we have over 20 archive trainings, but very much growing. We'll probably have closer to 60 or so when we're done loading all of them. But we do have an online learning system for members. It allows advocates to earn on-demand CEs and CEUs. We also are really excited to answer technical assistance questions. We think if you don't ask the question, you won't learn. So we're always very happy to answer those regarding case questions, ethics, accessibility, language access, and things like that. We're very happy to answer those sorts of questions. In addition, we also develop best practices, which are completely free and available on our website. And we also advocate for legislative changes that better protect survivors.
So what does your membership look like? Do you primarily serve advocates in certain roles, or is it broader than that?
We do today have over 650 members across the state of Ohio. And like I said, anyone who's interested in deepening their knowledge and advocacy skills is absolutely welcome to join. Our members are from a huge variety of backgrounds. While traditionally and still to this day, most of our members are in a governmental-based agency like a prosecutor's office or police department, we do also have folks who are providing more generalist services in other environments as well, like hospitals, trauma recovery centers, universities, nonprofits, including culturally specific services, mental health organizations. And we also have folks who are members of children's advocacy centers, domestic violence shelters, and rape crisis centers who are members as well. So everyone is welcome.
So you really do have quite a large range of who your members are, which I feel really highlights the fact that we all come to this work from different angles, but are ultimately showing up for the same purpose of serving survivors. Can you share a few highlights from OVWA's history? What are some of the moments that have shaped the organization into what it is today?
We have a very long history. We are in our 48th year, I believe. So we were formed in 1978 when prosecutor-based victim witness divisions were first organizing across the state. It was really the first time that we were having those services. A group of 8 prosecutor-based programs did recognize the need for connection, training, and professional support. So the programs really came together to share their struggles, what was going really well for them, their triumphs. And they also worked together to get the profession recognized and respected. You know, when they were building it from nothing, there was no real precedent. And so people weren't too sure what victim advocates did. Their role was maybe a bit misunderstood at times, and the importance of providing advocacy was also not fully understood. We didn't have any evidence-based studies that had been done to show how important victim advocacy was. So at the time, you know, a lot of our members who were mostly in prosecutor-based settings were sometimes almost just treated as an extension of the prosecutor's office, which they are. But, you know, sometimes they were asked to make copies or get coffee, or more to serve as an assistant to the prosecutor than to victims of crime. So it has been a little bit of, you know, educating everybody about the role of a victim advocate and really proving that the advocates are a really intrinsic part to the justice system. Studies have shown that when a survivor works with a victim advocate in a prosecutor-based setting, or has an advocate who comes in and is there with them throughout the legal process, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a prosecutor-based advocate, they do feel more like the justice system was fair and responsive to their needs, and they're also more likely to participate in the justice system. I think people can get very overwhelmed, and it's really scary. If you've never been to court before, even if you have been to court, it can be quite scary. So advocates are just essential in terms of seeking that more traditional justice that we kind of think of. Of course, there's other types of justice as well.
Ooh, the part that resonated with me the most about your history is like that tension between being seen as support staff versus being recognized as essential to justice and healing. Wow, we've come quite a long way, and it's always so inspiring when you think about how this field didn't just appear fully formed, like it was built piece by piece by people like us who were just figuring it out in real time. So wild when you think about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me wonder what advocates are going to think like 50, 60, 70, 80 years from now when they look back at us. So I'm curious about the 4 years time of you being executive director. How has OVWA evolved under your leadership?
Yeah, so we were almost completely volunteer run from our formation in 1978 until we actually launched our statewide offices in 2017. If you all remember what happened in 2019 with VOCA funding, the timing could not be worse. But despite that, our members over the years have accomplished some pretty big things. But I would say when I joined OVWA, to be honest, we were very small at that time because we had the VOCA issues. And since we're a more generalist organization, some of the other forms of funding weren't maybe as available to us. We really didn't get a chance to kind of get our feet under us before we were hit with budget cuts. So when I came to OVWA just about 4 years ago, there were only two of us working at OVWA. It was myself and Wendy Rixhoff, who has been with OVWA since 2018. She is our program director here. And if you haven't gotten the chance to meet her, really recommend you get to know her. She's phenomenal. So it was really just the two of us trying to figure out how we could build OVWA. We looked at our other statewide partners and we were like, they're doing such good work. We want to do that sort of work. We want to do more. And we have really worked to build OVWA. We're now at 5 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee. And that has been phenomenal. And it's through so much support and collaboration that has been able to happen. We actually added a position in December that will allow us to launch essentially a new advocate training institute for more generalist advocates. We just noticed that there was, although Summit County Victim Assistance does a phenomenal job, it's not accessible to everybody. A lot of folks just can't spare folks for that long, or it can be cost prohibitive at times for some folks. We think they do an amazing job, but we also want to essentially rebuild the 40-hour new advocate training for the state. So we have been granted the the opportunity to do that. I think it's really necessary, and we will be launching that a little later this year. Some other things that we've done, let's see, we have been updating our prosecutor-based victim advocacy in Ohio guide. We had published that originally in the late 90s, and quite a few things have changed since that time. Our field is always evolving. I think that's really beautiful, but yeah, the guide is long overdue. So we are just about to publish that probably in the next couple of weeks. We've also been working on a multi-year project to understand the gaps and needs in services for co-victims of homicide, so those who have lost a loved one to homicide. We actually just launched a helpline for co-victims of homicide across the state of Ohio to try to bridge some of those gaps in service. We've also created an accompanying resource hub that assists those who have lost a loved one to homicide in navigating grief, administrative tasks that they unfortunately have to deal with, as well as the justice system. There will be an accompanying printable guide for co-victims that will be available in the next few weeks when we get it back from the graphic designer.
Wow. Hearing how much growth has happened in just the past few years is kind of incredible, especially with the funding challenges that you mentioned. Like, it really sounds like you and Wendy were just two advocates with a dream.
It is so exciting. And yeah, exactly what you said. We just have so many things that we want to accomplish as an organization. And I think we had a little bit of a rough start to life in terms of transitioning from volunteer-based to full-time a statewide office. We definitely had some setbacks, but it's been honestly an incredible journey, and everyone's been so supportive and enthusiastic about what we're working on. So we just really appreciate everyone's support.
Okay, so I want to shift us into talking more specifically about OAN. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this on the podcast multiple times, but I'll be transparent again and say that I don't have an advocacy background. So when I joined the field, I always felt like 50 steps behind all of my colleagues, and it was a challenge to get used to the numerous acronyms everywhere. So, OAN. Can you walk us through the who, what, when, where, and why behind OAN?
Yeah, absolutely. And someone had the forethought to record interviews with folks, I believe it was in the late 90s, who had been involved with OVWA. And so I rewatched an interview regarding OAN. So I have some really like from the source information. So OAN, or the Ohio Advocate Network, basically was built from OVWA members, again, all volunteer based. They started talking about the concept of OAN at either the late 80s, maybe early 90s, through our training committee. They saw the need to professionalize the field of victim advocacy. At that time, there wasn't a degree program that qualified you to become a victim advocate, nor was there any sort of licensure. You could walk through the doors of a place and start providing advocacy tomorrow. Some advocates like today did have formal post-secondary education in things that were related, like criminal justice, sociology, or social work. Others had no post-secondary education, but had a real passion and talent for advocacy work. However, even with post-secondary education in a pertinent field, you don't generally learn the ethics and skills to become a victim advocate. There are programs that are launching more recently that are specifically setting folks up to be a victim advocate. I think that's phenomenal. But the goal of OAN is really to ensure that everyone's kind of starting from the same place, that as advocates in Ohio, we all have the same pre-service education that's meeting certain standards in order to make sure that everyone's providing trauma-informed, culturally humble and responsive, equitable services to victims and survivors of crime. We also felt that there was quite a bit of disconnect, and I think that this somewhat continues to today, but I do think it's getting better. That is, advocates in different specialties sometimes feel like they're in different worlds from each other, but there are quite a few commonalities among advocates. So across disciplines like domestic violence, sexual assault, or prosecutor-based, and the many other types, advocates share some of the same guiding principles, although depending on the setting that they're within, might have different strengths and limitations to the work that they're able to do and the services that they can provide, limits to confidentiality and things of that nature. But I would say that at the end of the day, all advocates really strive to provide ethical, empowering, and impactful services to victims and survivors of crime. We all work to promote autonomy and choice through education and support, and we all walk alongside victims and survivors throughout their journey, whatever that looks like for them. So when OAN, or the Ohio Advocate Network, was officially launched in 1994, there was a real fear that if advocates didn't define the standards for our field for ourselves, then standards could potentially be imposed upon us from outside sources that maybe didn't know as much about advocacy. So OAN was an attempt to be very proactive in terms of defining the standards of pre-service education and ethics for our field. At the time, they wanted advocates to kind of craft that narrative and the minimum standards. So OAN, it basically ensures a basis of pre-service education and victim services that covers areas such as victims' rights, resources, crisis intervention, empowerment, ethics, and trauma. It is intended to be inclusive and unifying across disciplines and to show that deep commitment to providing ethical services and also pursue continuous improvement as professionals.
Elyse, it sounds like you were speaking directly to me there when you said that people come into advocacy from different backgrounds with different levels of formal training. I'm like, yeah, that's me. But it really speaks to the fact that like people can come from different backgrounds or have different education, and we can all still do deeply impactful work. I know in other fields, I'm thinking specifically about like the healthcare field, credentialing and continuing education is a requirement to maintain licensure. Is that the case with OAN?
It's still voluntary to today. You still, as of right now in Ohio, don't have to have any specific training to become a victim advocate. It's really left to individual employers. However, we think that OAN is a standard of excellence that advocates are able to pursue to really show that they're dedicated to providing the best possible services that they can. However, to maintain the credential, there are a certain number of continuing education hours that an advocate does have to attain. Although it's voluntary at this time, many other states have pushed for required pre-service education before folks are able to actually work with victims and survivors of crime. I do think that that makes some sense for sure, but I don't know that that is in the works at this time. As of right now, completely voluntary. But I think especially for folks who maybe don't have specific post-secondary education in victim services or in a related field, it does confer kind of, I would say, a certain sense of professionalism and legitimacy. If you attain the registered advocate credential, you're able to use the RA credential after your name. So if you see that around, that's what that is. There's also the CA credential, which is credentialed advocate through NACP. And in fact, OAN served as the model for the National Advocate Credentialing Program, NACP, through NOVA, which was launched in 2003. And many people choose to get both of those credentials.
Okay, more acronyms. Can you break down the difference between NACP and OAN?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that many advocates choose to pursue both the registered advocate and the credentialed advocate certification. And yes, a lot of the same people actually that launched OAN also launched NACP. So when it was started, they were very, very similar. They've since diverged a little bit, but in general, if you have one, you shouldn't have too much trouble getting the other. Like the name suggests, NACP, or the National Advocate Credentialing Program, is a national credential, so it tends to be a bit more broad in its requirements. You won't be required to have training specifically on the rights of victims in Ohio to be eligible to apply for NACP credential, whereas OAN does require specific pre-service training in the constitutionally mandated rights of victims of crime in Ohio, and also some of the very Ohio-specific resources like Crime Victims Comp, that if you only pursue national credentialing, you wouldn't be required to have that specific training. So I would say for me, what the OAN credential conveys is that you have really committed yourself to being a strong advocate in Ohio, that you kind of understand the systems, how they work together, you understand the resources in Ohio, that you're really dedicated to being a victim advocate here. But a lot of people, like I said, do both credentials, and I think that is completely valid. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a difference. I don't want to speak too much to like kind of the nitty-gritty of the differences because I'm not an expert in NACP, but there are some differences in terms of number of hours and the application fees are a little different and things of that nature.
Okay, so NACP is more nationally focused and OAN really grounds advocates in Ohio-specific systems. Okay, cool. So it really just sounds like they're both useful, but if you pursue one or the other, really kind of depends on your own personal and professional goals. Can you share an example of someone who could benefit from getting involved in OAN? Since I work at the state sexual violence coalition, like when I hear the word advocate, my brain immediately goes to people working with survivors of sexual violence. But I know the term advocate stretches into many realms and fields beyond this one.
So the credential is specifically set up for victim advocates or survivor advocates and allied professionals. So for example, if you are a therapist, let's say that 10% of your caseload is folks who have experienced a crime. You could actually get the OAN credential. So there are allied professionals, if you're a police officer and you really want to deepen your commitment to being a very good advocate within your role, you could absolutely pursue the credential as well. So it really is intended for victim advocates and allied professionals who serve specifically victims and survivors of crime.
So, Elyse, a little birdie told me that there is a planned transition of OAN moving under OVWA.
Yes, absolutely. So Ohio Advocate Network, like much of OVWA over the years, operated on a volunteer basis since its inception, essentially. OAN was actually a separate nonprofit from OVWA until this year. Last year, Terry LaJeunesse, the director of the Victim Witness Division of the Greene County Prosecutor's Office and longtime chair of OAN, retired. We're so thrilled for her. And as part of the planned transition of OAN, administrative oversight of the program has been folded into OVWA. So although we are technically taking over administrative tasks associated with OAN, we really see ourselves as the stewards of OAN. That is, all applications, decisions regarding minimum standards, ethical concerns, and any other such items are conducted and will remain conducted through the multidisciplinary review committee that guides OAN, of which OAESV actually is a member. We have Elliot is one of the review committee members. We really think it's important for all of us to work together to kind of shape the future of victim advocacy and to be making pretty big decisions regarding minimum standards for the field. We definitely don't want to be working in a vacuum. And I do think it's really important to have those very diverse viewpoints and sometimes dissenting voices at the table. So that will continue to be a major part of OAN. Just how OAN looks on paper will be a little different.
What excites you most about this transition?
I would say I'm most excited to really grow OAN. I think there's so much that we can do to grow it. I think that there's a lot of advocates out there that don't even know about OAN, and I think that that's such a shame. But we are constrained, I would say, as of right now, because it is an entirely paper process. So it is a bit limited. We only have so much office space to store files, and we only have so many people hours available to process applications. So I am very excited. We are currently working on building out a system that will allow folks to be able to apply entirely online, really bringing us into the 21st century, which is very exciting. And we'll also be able to automate some of the things that we're currently doing, like sending out renewal reminders and things like that. We can really grow, like I said, grow OAN once we kind of have that in place, which should be ready by the end of this year. The OAN portal won't just allow for applications, but it will also have a searchable directory for members only where you can connect with other registered advocates. I think that's really exciting because the whole purpose of OAN is to provide a credential across disciplines that sets a basic standard. And I think that it will allow us to hopefully be less siloed as a field. I would really like, advocates to be able to connect with each other across the state. So the online system will also house an OAN certificate. So if you do lose it, you can print it on demand. It'll automatically remind you when it's time to renew. We are also hopeful that it will eliminate some of the common errors we see on applications by actually requiring the upload of certain documents or information prior to submission. The platform we're using has some other plugins available that we're really considering utilizing. There's a forum option, which we think could be really cool. There's also some committee options. So if there's a group that wants to touch base and work on a certain problem, that could also be a way to connect. So we're really hoping to, especially as a lot of folks in the field, it does feel like a lot of folks are retiring right now who have been here from the very beginning. And I think that we're kind of missing that human connection in the field. We're also losing the wealth of knowledge and ideas that exist across our state. So we really hope that it will grow into a place where folks can share ideas like what's working well in their programs or ideas that they've had. And has anyone tried this before? What were challenges you ran into? We would just really like people to be able to connect. We think that technology, for all of its attempts to unite people, can be very isolating, but we hope that we can utilize it in a way that's really unifying and actually impactful for the field.
The move to an online system is awesome.
Yes, we are incredibly excited about it. And we are also completely open to other ideas. So if folks ever want to reach out to us and let us know what they're thinking, we are very receptive to ideas.
I know it's going to be a massive change, and with change comes a lot of resistance sometimes, but I feel like this could open up even more access and support for advocates across the state. Okay, so let's get into the practical side a little bit. If someone is listening and thinking, okay, I'm interested. What is their first step? What does the credentialing process actually look like?
Yeah, so credentialing through OAN is designed to be meaningful but approachable. So the process does look at several key areas in terms of training and education, professional and volunteer experience, ethics and professional standards, and then continuous professional growth. So if you are a brand new applicant to OAN, you have to have at least 1,950 direct service work or volunteer hours. Those can also be internship hours. And that's just about 1 year of work in the field. You do need verification of those hours from your organization through a form that's in the application packet, and it's called the Memorandum of Confirmation. You can actually get all of the forms you need on our website at ovwa.org/OAN, or just visiting our homepage, and it's right there at the top. So all of it is in one combined packet, so it should be pretty much everything you would need. There are some supplemental materials like forms and things that are also available, but essentially you need your employer to attest to the hours that you've worked. You need a direct service observation form completed by somebody who has seen you work with victims or survivors of crime. You need a quick letter of recommendation. We do have ethical standards that all registered advocates are required to adhere to. So we've actually, at this point, adopted the National Advocate Credentialing Program Code of Professional Ethics for victim assistance providers. We just think that they did such a good job with it. We felt like we didn't really have much more to add to it. So applicants must review and agree to abide by those ethical standards. There is an application fee, and there's also several assurances as to the accuracy of their application. They have to attest that they've never been convicted of a violent crime, and several other assurances. The last part that I've kind of hinted to quite a bit is, I would say, the part that probably trips people up the most, and that is just the training component. it can seem a little overwhelming, but hopefully I can kind of clarify that here today. So for new applicants, if it's your very first time applying for the Registered Advocate credential, there is a 4-year look back on completed training. In the last 4 years, all new applicants must complete a minimum of 40 hours of continuing education training. At least 20 of those hours have to be live, whether that's in person or through webinar, and not pre-recorded. The other hours can be through pre-recorded webinar. In addition to the required hours of training, there are also required topics that all new applicants must be trained in. I will say, to make this process a little easier, because it can seem overwhelming, like, oh, well, where do I get this training? Where do I get that training? There are some training courses in the state that have already been pre-approved for their content, meaning that if you complete that course, you've completed all the topic areas that are required. Those training courses are the Summit Victim Assistance Academy, ODVN's Domestic Violence Advocacy Fundamentals, and of course, OAESV's Training Institute. I will say that while the content area is completely covered, if you take one of those 3 courses, not all of them have always been 40 or more hours. So you may have to, if you took, for example, Domestic Violence Advocacy Fundamentals 4 years ago, and at that time, I believe it was about 24 hours of training, you might have to supplement your application with a few additional trainings to get up to that 40 hours of training. But the content itself is covered. So I hope that makes sense. If you do complete one of the training courses and it's at least 40 hours, you don't need to submit additional documentation, only the certificate from that training academy or institute. The more complicated, kind of convoluted way to get the training hours met is not through training institutes. You still have to do the 40 hours of pre-service training, but it does have to be in certain topic areas. So those are called, I'm sorry, we do love our acronyms. So we're just really, as a field, love our acronyms. But these are called the Training Area Guidelines, or the TAG list. Those are available on the website to review as well. So advocates do have to learn about crisis intervention, role of the advocate, case management, the justice system, crime victims comp, VINE notification, equity, the history of the victims' rights movement, and ethics. And then there's some additional specialized topics that may vary depending on whether your specialty is children's advocacy, sexual assault advocacy, domestic violence advocacy, or a more generalist or systems-based advocacy. So for advocates working with survivors of sexual assault, they do need training, additional training. They have to meet certain topics like trauma-informed care, community resources and referrals, the dynamics of sexual violence, and then also safe protocol and hospital advocacy. I know that that's a lot, or it sounds like a lot. I promise that the application form, the packet, walks you through everything that you need. It's really just a matter of submitting the required documentation and getting signatures on certain forms. The application process itself can get a little technical, so we do have a webinar on our YouTube channel and also on our website that outlines some of the specifics and has visual references for folks who are more of a visual learner.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are there any common misconceptions about the process that you want to clear up? But I feel like you pretty much already answered that by just saying, I know it sounds like a lot, but a lot of people have done it, so it's not impossible.
Oh, yeah. And most of the time, there's really no issues. And I kind of pre-screen applications when I get them. So if there are any really glaring issues, I do reach out to folks to try to get it resolved before it goes to the review committee. A couple things about OAN: our applications are only accepted twice a year, in July and January. And the reason for that is the review committee meets twice a year at the end of the following month generally, so end of August and end of February, to review applications. So, if you submit an application, you're like, oh man, I haven't heard anything. It is in process, most likely, unless you've submitted it outside of that timetable, in which case it would either be for right now, we're kind of just reviewing them at the next one because there are so many changes. We're trying to be as accommodating as possible.
Plus, you can update your LinkedIn and put RA after your name, which is fun.
Yes, yeah, you can use it in on your business card. You can use it in your email signature. And like I said, we love our acronyms. So I also think the registered advocate credential, like I said, it is all about commitment to excellence and continuous learning. Our field is constantly changing, and we have to stay on top of the things that have evolved. We're not the same field as we were in 1978. We've learned a lot, and we've learned what works and what doesn't work. And, you know, 10 years down the road, we're probably going to look back and say, oh my gosh, that was not the most trauma-informed way to do things. I can't believe they were doing things that way. As a profession, we just have to stay on top of what's developing, what's evidence-based. So part of the OAN credential is you do renew your application, you renew your credential every 2 years. You have to include documentation for at least 30 hours of continuing education. That has been completed over the last couple of years, which we feel is extremely attainable since there are so many webinars and free trainings just available all the time. We do recommend that advocates seek out kind of more advanced topics in between those times and also train across disciplines to deepen their knowledge and really gain an understanding about some of the more peripheral parts of their role, for example. So we really recommend cross training, and we're pretty flexible in terms of topic areas that we accept. But yeah, we really believe that the only way we're going to change the landscape of services for victims of crime in Ohio is if we work together, start to understand each other, and work to center the victim, the survivor in our efforts as a field.
Okay, this is another place where OAESV can fit into this puzzle because there are people who are already attending our trainings, for example. So 30 hours may feel like a lot, but you might already be halfway there.
It's really not too difficult, in my opinion. I mean, 30 hours of training every 2 years is nothing. That's 15 hours a year. I mean, if you go to just the OAESV conference, you're probably done. You've got your continuing education hours in most situations. So we think it's attainable. Yeah, and we're really excited about the work and about the future of OAN. We know that there is a real opportunity to grow it and to include some additional perks of becoming a registered advocate that we haven't had before.
Before we wrap up, where can folks go to stay connected and keep up with everything OVWA has coming up?
Yes, so both of them right now are on our website at ovwa.org. OAN does not have its own social media right now or its own newsletter, but if you would like to subscribe to our newsletter, that's on our website. Our social media, all of our accounts are Ohio Victim Witness Association, and we have quite a bit of things coming up that we will be sharing. So yeah, we hope you will follow us and get to know a little bit about what we do.
I always like to end on a more personal note. So, Elyse, if you don't mind sharing, what's giving you hope right now in this work?
I mean, last year was a really rough year in terms of funding losses, especially for prevention programming, but we all really persist. We as a field are forging forward and making changes and making things better, no matter what is happening around us. I think that really staying very focused on what we're working on and what we're trying to accomplish, we can only fight so many battles. And I think that staying really focused on advocacy work and what we do have control over, which is how we show up in our work every day, is really what's getting me through a lot of things. We can't solve every problem in the world, but we can make a commitment to show up for the folks that we're serving every day with the best of ourselves and really continuing to learn and always figuring out new and better ways of doing things so that we can just be more empathetic and more ethical and more impactful in the work that we're doing, that we can empower people more with the knowledge and education that they need to make a decision that's right for themselves. So I would say that, it's been a hard few years since funding losses started in 2019, but we are really resilient, just like the people that we serve. And we will come out of this, stronger and better and more scrappy than ever before. So that's, I think, what gives me hope is I know that we can make it through as a field. We just have to work together.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I have definitely been asking myself in moments recently, like, what can I control right now? And you're right. I'd say 100% of the time I can control my own actions in this moment and how I show up. Thank you so much for chatting with me today and helping me understand the differences between some of these acronyms. I really enjoyed this conversation, and it's clear that there's a lot of thoughtful work happening behind the scenes to support advocates and ultimately survivors across Ohio. And that brings me hope too.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here today to speak about OVWA and OAN more broadly. I think that being in this work is very humbling, and I'm just really grateful to get to work alongside other folks like OAESV. We really appreciate your time today.
For those of you listening, if something in this conversation sparked your interest, I'd really encourage you to learn more about the Ohio Advocate Network and what credentialing could look like for you or your team. As always, thank you for the work you do every day. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Teal Talk. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into intersectional issues affecting survivors in Ohio. If you like what you heard, subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review, recommend us to a friend, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at OAESV and Twitter at Ohio Alliance ESV. If you'd like to learn more about us and the services we offer, sign up for our email list, or read a transcript of this episode, visit oaesv.org.
Want to share a comment or ask a question for a future episode? Just click on the link in the show notes to leave us a voicemail. And remember, we're here to help. Feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. See you next time.